Hey everyone, welcome inside the CitrusTV studio for another edition of Beat the Bookie. I'm Skyler Wilkes. Now, I do want to preface with the fact that I'm not particularly knowledgeable when it comes to sports betting. To me though, there are two types of sports gamblers, bettors and ball knowers, and I am definitely more of a ball knower. Plus, I'm an actual member of the sports department. That's something that my predecessor, Jake Morrell, cannot say. And while I guess he wasn't awful, you'd ideally like to win more than $6. So let's take a look at exactly how the second best JMO in Beat the Bookie history fared. Like I said, $6, nothing special. He did knock that Texas pick out of the park, dominated Michigan. That Wolverines team is really on the downturn, looking fraudulent without Jim Harbaugh. Everything went south though when it got to the parlay. He got the Nebraska game right, got the Texas game right, but then when he went back to Lincoln, things went south. Bet the over 56.5 and didn't get anywhere near that. Cornhuskers absolutely blew out the Buffaloes, but not good enough to win that $20, so he comes in at $6. Not great from Jake. You know, you might as well ask him to bet on the presidential debate, but football, it didn't do awful. Didn't want to say he did get that Iowa State pick wrong. You know, personal ties to the Hawkeyes, that's embarrassing. That offense can't move the ball, but not a terrible performance nonetheless for Jake Morrell. But now it's time to get into my picks.
Hey, Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money!
We start with college game day and an SEC clash between 16th ranked LSU and South Carolina. The Tigers have been a bit underwhelming to start the season. After a loss to USC in week 1, Brian Kelly's squad gave up 3 touchdowns to FCS Nichols last time out. Now, I like the Colonels as much as everyone, but that's kind of embarrassing. Even though Garrett Nussmeier threw 6 touchdowns, I'm still not totally sold on him either. But when you look at the Gamecocks, they're 2-0 with a conference victory already under their belt. South Carolina also has the second most sacks in the country, led by star freshman Dylan Stewart, Kids Electric. And when you factor in the atmosphere at Williams-Brice, might be tough for the Tigers. So in support of my good friend Alex Ramol, I'm putting $15 on the Gamecocks to cover the 6.5-point spread. Heading out to an underwhelming journalism school, number 6 Missouri hosts number 24 Boston College. At 2-0, BC is off to a dream start in Bill O'Brien's first year. The Eagles are ranked for the first time since 2018, which mostly stems from a road win at then 10th ranked Florida State. However, the Seminoles aren't actually good, so that doesn't really mean anything anymore. But nonetheless, on the flip side, the Tigers have outscored their opponents, Murray State and Buffalo, so real tough competition there, 89-0. Mizzou's Luther Burden is one of the top wideouts in the country and should pose a real threat to BC. And realistically, Eagles quarterback Thomas Castellanos is just not ready for the SEC smoke, couldn't even handle it in the AAC with UCF. And even after Eli Drinkwitz made a fool out of himself in Chestnut Hill a few years ago, which, can you believe that? He's going to exact his revenge this week. I'm not super confident about it though, because Missouri hasn't played anyone, so I'm only putting $5 on the Tigers to cover the 16.5-point spread. And to the old Pac-12, a old rivalry week matchup. It's number 9 Oregon and Oregon State. The Ducks came into the season as true title favorites, but that seems pretty fraudulent. 2 narrow victories over FCS Idaho and Boise State. So for some reason, the state of Idaho really giving Dan Lanning's crew some trouble. They've looked pretty uninspiring. In his 6th year of college, you'd like to see Duck signal caller Dylan Gabriel perform a little bit better. Meanwhile, the Beavers don't really have anything to lose. Basically, OSU's entire conference left it behind and plans to replace it with somewhat irrelevant programs. And given Oregon's sloppy first few games though, this one also has me uncertain. So I'm only putting $5 down for Oregon State to cover the 16.5-point spread. So those are my picks on the big games this week. Let's see what our producers have to say about it. Great picture of me and my alter ego, Scotty Scheffler. That's my secret career that I have on the side as a multiple-time majors champion at the golf level. And of course, they all bet against me. So our producers, Jordan Leonard and Arnav Pokrell, no, that's not Tottenham winning Arnav, it's LSU taking the -6.5 spread, winning on the road. BC covering 16.5. I was really wrestling with that one. So not a bad pick overall. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes through. In Oregon, another thing, that's why I didn't bet too much money on it, because I just really wasn't sure how it was necessarily going to play out there out in Corvallis. But so far right now, I'm leading 2-1, which is always good news in typical Scotty Scheffler fashion, which, by the way, got to give Braden Reed, a BTB legend, shout out for that Photoshop edit, putting his great graphic design work to use. Has me 2-1 though, so I will take that. But away from the big games now to the actual games of the week that people really care about, the ones that I picked. We start with Arizona and Kansas State, a Big 12 matchup. Who would have thought? That's a Wildcats team that's really interesting. Put on an offensive clinic against New Mexico in week 1, but then played FCS Northern Arizona a little too close last week. But undoubtedly, and I know our producer Jordan Leonard would agree, that Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver for the Wildcats, is as elite as they come. So when you look at him and quarterback Noah Fafita, it's a really interesting combination. The only thing holding them back, in my opinion, is Dino Babers, the offensive coordinator, who for Syracuse fans might sound a little bit familiar. He may or may not have been the head coach of the Orange for almost a decade, 2 bowl wins, 2 bowl games, only 1 win. Now he's out there working for Jed Fish at Arizona, and Brent Brennan. Jed Fish is at Washington. Brent Brennan at Arizona, playing a gritty Kansas State team who also narrowly escaped defeat last week against Tulane. Avery Johnson, a really good quarterback. The over-under here is at 60.5, and I'm going to put $15 here on the over. High-flying offense with McMillan and Fafita, and Arizona State, like I said, Avery Johnson is a really talented quarterback, very solid on his feet, so I could see that game being high-scoring out there. And now, staying in the Big 12, or more or less, we got UNLV and Kansas. This matchup had me smiling from ear to ear, really, when I saw it. I am a huge Rebels fan, really excited to see Syracuse battle them in just a few weeks. Barry Odom has done a tremendous job transforming that program, and Matt Sluka, a dominant dual-threat quarterback. He might be the most talented running quarterback that Syracuse faces this year. But away from that, they beat Houston, another Big 12 team, dominated them in week 1, and then absolutely obliterated FCS Utah Tech. Matt Sluka with 3 first-quarter touchdowns. Kansas, they lost to Illinois last week. That was an upset. They were ranked. Jalen Daniels, who was supposed to be in the Heisman conversation, 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Somehow Kansas, even though I guess maybe because they're the home team, is favored at -9.5, but I gave it away there. I'm putting $15 on the Rebels to cover that spread at +9.5. I just really like what is going out there in Las Vegas. Matt Sluka, Barry Odom, that is a winning conversation. That's a winning team overall. Patriot League Player of the Week of the Year, that stands for something. And we just continuing with the Big 12 theme here. Now in an interstate conference, we talked about Oregon, Oregon State. This is Colorado, Colorado State. Remember that matchup last year? That was absolutely ridiculous. This one, I don't know if it has the same type of hype, because neither team is actually good at football, right? You have Colorado barely beating North Dakota State in week 1 and then getting obliterated by Nebraska last week, despite what Shiloh Sanders actually said at the coin toss. And Colorado State has talent. Braden Nicolosi Fowler, Torrey Horton was supposed to get $600,000 offers to get poached away from Fort Collins. They stayed to play for Jay Norvell, and it hasn't really worked out too well. Shut out by Texas in week 1, and then against FCS Northern Colorado, played it pretty close. But the Buffaloes, they're just really not an inspiring team. I know they have one of the great Giants coaches in franchise history, Pat Shurmur, calling the offensive plays. That's, if you are a Giants fan and saw them play a few years ago, you know that's not a recipe for success. Shore Sanders, very good. Travis Hunter, obviously an elite player. But I don't even know if Travis Hunter's the best wide receiver on the field. Torrey Horton, one of my favorite players in college football, wide receiver for Colorado State, absolutely carved up the Buffaloes last year, and I can see him doing it again. So that's why, even though the spread is -7.5 for Colorado, I have the Rams covering that spread, putting $10 on it to maybe not even necessarily win, but keep it close just like last year. And the backyard brawl, finishing out here with my best bets. We've got West Virginia and Pittsburgh. pit another team that is on the docket for Syracuse this season. Not that that's really important. The Panthers off to a 2-0 start, led by Alabama transfer quarterback Eli Holstein. The impressive thing about Holstein is, and Pat Narduzzi, this team continuously generates success when they don't really have that many good players. Desmond Reed averaging 8.9 yards per carry to start the year through 2 games. Pretty impressive. And the Mountaineers, ever since Will Greer left, has just been a really not special team. So I think the aspect of this being at Acrisure Stadium at home for the Panthers adds a different dimension to it. So even though the Mountaineers are favored -1.5, I am rocking with the Panthers, putting $10 on them to cover the Backyard Brawl, one of the classic rivalries in college football. Not quite as highly touted as Syracuse and Pittsburgh, but I'd say it's somewhat close enough. As we continue on to the future picks, we're talking this weekend, right, with games like Kansas and UNLV. That game is tonight, Friday. But let's forecast into the future. I want to talk about a team that I'm also a big fan of. In Boise State, the Broncos, representing the Mountain West, plus 300 odds right now to make the college football playoff, right? They're a mid-major team coming out of the Mountain West. But I have a lot of trust in Spencer Danielson and the Broncos. Played Oregon really, really close. I mean, that was a nail-biter last week, so you got to give them a lot of credit. And especially Ashton Jeanty. Remember that name. He is a Heisman finalist, in my opinion. Probably the top running back in the country. He rushed for he had 20 carries, 267 yards, and 6 touchdowns in week 1, followed up against a really good Oregon team that doesn't play for clicks. They do not play for clicks, in case you were curious, and he still ran all over them. Dan Lanning, a defensive coordinator who carried Georgia to a national championship, specifically Stetson Bennett. You let Ashton Jeanty run all over you? Pretty embarrassing, so I suggest anchoring down your defense a little bit if you don't want to get embarrassed by the Beavers. But that's besides the point. Boise State, the Mountain West is really wide open. Colorado State, not actually good, so that's really the only competition they have. I wouldn't be surprised if Boise State, the only real competition is, I guess, Northern Illinois, although they're probably going to lose to a Kent State or maybe even another MAC team down the road. Who knows what's going to happen there? Akron might give them a run for their money. You never know in the MAC. And then Liberty, who is led by a really good quarterback in Caden Salter. That game is up in the air. But overall, when it comes down to it, I'm rocking with Boise State. Ashton Jeanty is going to run his team into the college football playoff. I feel pretty safe about that plus $300 bet. So that's why I'm putting $10 on it. I'm feeling pretty comfortable about it in the long run. But enough from my future picks. We've still got a lot of future picks out there in the running. We look at the future picks made by previous hosts of this show, starting off with the one that looks like it's going to hit the most. Joe Puccio, the late great Joe Puccio, betting on Aaron Judge as the home run king. Pretty safe bet. And then Steven Sklar, one of the greatest sports gamblers of our generation, betting on the New York Yankees to win the American League Championship. That one is still in play, right? It's not guaranteed. They're leading the AL East, but there are a lot of competitive teams in the American League, so it's not totally guaranteed. And then last week, we look at 2 made by Jake Morrell. You have Caleb Williams, the #1 overall pick, leading rookies in passing yards, and man, Jake, really bad pick after week 1. Williams didn't even throw for 100 yards, so got a long way to go if you want that one to cash out. He is a very capable quarterback, so not crazy, but this next one is really crazy. Chicago Bears Super Bowl champions. It took a Will Levis pick 6 late in the game to somewhat even make that a win. They were losing 17-0 to a Derrick Henry-less Tennessee Titans. So Jake, more of your bias showing through, not a great selection. I'm feeling, with my Boise State college football pick, I should be up there above Jake. I mean, Joe, Steven, and I, all Yankee fans, all great minds think alike. I like where we're at there with our heads for that future picks. I could see all 3 of us cashing out on that. Now time for the fun stuff. How about some parlays? 3 games that we're talking about today. And we start out in Wisconsin with Alabama and Wisco. The Crimson Tide off to a solid start in this post-Nick Saban era. Right now they are favored, minus 16, and I have them covering that spread. Wisconsin is just not the team of the Monte Ball or Melvin Gordon era. Tyler Van Dyke has really reached his point in college football. It's unfortunate, Connecticut guy, really talented quarterback at the high school level, but it didn't pan out in Coral Gables, and it's not going to pan out in Camp Randall. Alabama is going to handle them. Jalen Milroe, really good quarterback. Obviously, that Crimson Tide, just player for player on paper, is just a better team than the Badgers. We head from Camp Randall down south to Doak Campbell with Memphis and Florida State. The over-under is listed at 53.5, which again is really, really shocking. I don't understand how that possibly could have been acquired that way. The Tigers 2-0, Florida State 0-2. They're one of four teams or really one of three teams because they did it twice in the last decade that started the season in the preseason top 10 and to go 0-2. So not a great look for Mike Norvell, and this is his revenge game, right? He came to the Seminoles from the Tigers, and his quarterback is DJ Uiagalelei, which I think kind of tells you all you need to know, right? Like, this is not going to reach more than 53.5 points. His predecessor, Ryan Silverfield, good coach, and could be on the move elsewhere, but not for now. This game is definitely not hitting that 53.5 over. It's going under, and this is not going to be a super high scoring matchup. Third game of the slate, we have Oklahoma and Tulane from Norman. John Sumrall, tough task really for its leaves. He's brought in to kind of keep that Tulane power, mid-major rep alive, and brought with him, after winning a Sun Belt at Troy, brought almost the entire roster with him, brought in Ty Thompson from Oregon to be his quarterback, got a few former Oklahoma players that played with Lincoln Riley in Norman a few years ago. But they did play Kansas State very close last week, but it's too tough. They're not used to that environment. No Michael Pratt, no Tyjae Spears. Sooners, Jackson Arnold at quarterback, have a lot of really good weapons. They're favored at 13.5, minus 13.5, that is. And the Sooners, I don't know if they're going to wipe the floor with the Green Wave, but it's definitely going to be a victory for OU. Tulane, back-to-back losses. But hey, while that may ruin their chances of a college football playoff, it says that if they're able to keep this close, it could mean some big things for the group of five teams in the future. Kansas State, Oklahoma, they played them close, so could mean big things, momentum potentially for John Sumrall in the future. But again, to go through it one more time, we have Alabama covering the minus 16.5 spread on Wisconsin, 53.5 over-under between Memphis and Florida State. Yeah, that's definitely hammering the under there. And then Oklahoma and Tulane, it's a minus 13.5 favor for the Sooners. They're going to cover, putting a total of $15 up to win close to $90 there. So hopefully that's pretty good. Maybe not Jesse Cook level of good,